This series of 9 videos is about our vacation in 2017. Yellowstone was the focus of the trip, but the journey there and back meant as much as Yellowstone itself. Part 1 is about the first 3 days of travel through Colorado and Wyoming. At the end of our first day of driving, we arrived in Denver. Rebecca and I had good memories from our childhoods of a Mexican restaurant in town called Casa Bonita, and we wanted to let Z have the experience. Casa Bonita is as much a theme park as it is a restaurant, with the interior styled like various parts of Mexico. It would not be hard to get lost in the place for a short period. One of the most memorable parts for Rebecca and I was the cliff diving right inside the restaurant, and we wanted to make sure Z got to see that. As it turned out, our table was right next to the diving pool, so we had a great view. After Casa Bonita, we walked next door to the Westfax Brewery. Visiting local breweries is one of our favorite things to do on our trips. Westfax was not very crowded, and the lemon dill amber I had was unique and yummy. That pretty much sums up our night in Denver. After Westfax, we headed back to the hotel and hit the sack. Our second day started bright and early. From Denver, we drove north toward Laramie, Wyoming, and saw some features I hadn't seen before. We also started seeing pronghorns almost as soon as we entered Wyoming. The year before, we followed the Oregon Trail from Kansas to Oregon, stopping at points of interest along the way. One stop we drove right by that I regretted was Independence Rock. Since it was basically on our way, I wanted to stop this year. It was not the most prominent landmark, but it was important to the pioneers. Independence Rock was so named because the goal of trail pioneers was to reach it by Independence Day so they would feel confident that they could make their destination before snow started falling in the western mountains. It was a beautiful day and we were ready to climb to the top. But first, a selfie. Teenagers. Z had to rest and/or pose on her way to the top, but she and all of us eventually made it. Rebecca celebrated with a raspberry and a picture. Let's say it was a picture of this. I don't know. After following the Platte River through Nebraska and part of Wyoming, the pioneers' route took them along the Sweetwater River, which flows right by Independence Rock. As they rested here, many would carve their names into the rock, and you can find carvings all over it from both the trail days and more modern times. At the base of the rock on the far side, some boulders had fallen, creating a cave, where we found a cottontail. We also saw something hovering over a thistle at the base of the rock. From a distance we thought it was a hummingbird, but when we got closer we saw it was a bug. It turns out it was a white-lined sphinx moth. Didn't seem to mind us at all. We headed west from Independence Rock, and soon the Wind River mountain range appeared before us. At the south end of the range is Sinks Canyon. Here, the south-facing slopes are covered with grasses and sagebrush, and the north-facing slopes are forested. It is an open range area, and we ran into some cattle on the road. We found a plant we hadn't seen before, and got to see the aspens in their fall colors. We also saw a mule deer. We set up camp right next to the Poposia River. The sound of the river right next to our camp was just blissful, and it was a beautiful night. The next day, we woke up at dawn and drove back up the canyon to Fry Lake. The sunrise put a reddish hue on the mountains. We got to see more fall colors and even some reddish-orange aspens. Here, I thought I heard a moose, but it turned out to be the noise created by the reservoir flowing through the dam. Back at the campsite, Z chilled out by the river while we packed up. Sinks Canyon gets its name from a phenomenon that happens just downriver from our campground. The river rounds this bend, and ends up plunging into a cave. The river just sinks into the ground, so this is called the sinks. A quarter-mile down the canyon from the sinks, the water rises back out of the ground and continues flowing out of the canyon. The rise is full of trout. Because the area is protected and the rise rarely freezes, it provides good habitat for both brown and rainbow trout. It also helps that there is a coin-operated feeder at the observation point. This is what they do when you feed them. After feeding the trout, we said goodbye to Sinks Canyon and headed north along the eastern slope of the Wind River Range. Rebecca got to drive through the town with the name she likes to say, and we saw more pronghorns. We turned off the highway and headed up the Dinwoody Valley, where we stumbled upon what we think was an old movie set. Then we continued north through the gorgeous scenery of the Indian Reservation to the Torrey Valley. In the Torrey Valley, we saw an osprey nest, a merganser, and more mule deer. At the end of the valley road is a hiking trail, and we were ready to get out of the car. Along the trail, we stopped to watch a ground squirrel doing his thing. Our hope was to see some bighorn sheep in the Torrey Valley, since the area is home to one of the largest wintering herds in the world. But we had no such luck, so we appreciated this little guy. After the Torrey Valley, our route took us around the northern tip of the Wind River Range and into Jackson Hole. It was too cloudy to really see the grandeur of the Grand Tetons, but we would be back this way, so we pushed on to Yellowstone. Finally, we entered Yellowstone. It started raining before we got to the park, but shortly after we entered, the clouds broke and we got a rainbow. From the south entrance, Lewis Falls is one of the first points of interest you come to. We continued on to the Old Faithful area, where the geyser was predicted to erupt about 45 minutes after we arrived. While we were waiting, we decided to visit the Old Faithful Inn. This was a building for which pictures do not do it justice. Its vaulted ceilings are 6 stories high. As the time for Old Faithful's eruption approached, we headed back to the viewing area. The skies were not picture perfect, but at least the rain had let up and we got to check off another thing from our bucket list. and this is how we ended our day. Part 2 takes us to the geyser basins in the southwest part of the park loop.